Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome from the RTD studio here in Brussels at the launch event of a report from an independent expert group that is looking into how we can address the research and innovation challenges for a systemic change in the energy and mobility sectors. Today, in this event, we will be presenting the key findings of this report to you, and we also have a high-level panel discussion to talk through the conclusions of this report and the implications that it has for our research and innovation system. The report has been prepared by 4 very high-level experts, Pier Paolo Gazzole, Frank Geels, Paula Kivima and also Wolf Ketter. We have 2 of the authors with us here in Brussels in the TV studio to really talk you through the key findings of this report. But before we go and dive into the findings of the report, we would really like to encourage you to use Slido. We would like this launch event to be a very interactive session with you. So please use Slido to bring your comments on what you hear today, in particular on the key challenges that have been identified by this report, and of course also to ask questions to our panelists. So please join Slido by using the hashtag Clean Energy Mobility or the QR code that you can see on the screen. But before we dive into the findings of this report, it is my big honor and pleasure to pass the floor to the Deputy Director General of DG Research and Innovation, Joanna Drake, for introductory remarks and a scene setter. Joanna.
Thank you so much, Rosarinda, for that very warm welcome, and hello to everyone watching online. Really pleased to have the opportunity to speak at this morning's launch event for the report Addressing European Research and Innovation Challenges for System Transitions in Energy and Mobility. It's quite a mouthful. This independent expert report, published by the Commission, is very timely, and I would like to thank the authors for their work. In my speech, I'd like to touch on just 3 points. The current political and policy context for the European Union, the role of research and innovation, and the need for a systemic approach, as advocated for in this very report. So let's start with the current political and policy context. The report provides a vision, recommendations, and also actions for how EU R&I policy in the areas of energy and mobility should adapt to the challenges the EU now faces. The report's messaging chimes with President von der Leyen's political guidelines for the next Commission, which highlight the following priority areas, and I quote, defense and security, sustainable prosperity and competitiveness, democracy and social fairness, leading in the world, and delivering in Europe. These same priorities are more or less matched by the contextual changes and challenges selected by the report's authors. That makes their analysis of how 9 specific innovation pathways can navigate these adversities in order to create the energy and mobility systems we require to meet our goals, particularly prescient and relevant. Secondly, what is the role of research and innovation in this? So as well as the renewed emphasis on competitiveness, recent developments have seen research and innovation afforded greater limelight. It is acknowledged that research and innovation must be, as President von der Leyen has stated, at the heart of the EU's economy. And the Letta report and the Draghi report both noted the potential of research and innovation to invigorate the EU and to be the basis of our future prosperity. Our future Commissioner is tasked with boosting Europe's competitiveness by driving the EU's scientific and technological progress from research, basic research rather, to applied innovation. However, there is also recognition that EU research and innovation policy must evolve in order to become more effective and really enable the transitions we all want to achieve. The recently published reports and I quote the title, Align, Act, Accelerate, the 3 A's, provide concrete recommendations for the future of the Framework Programme on Research and Innovation, and the details also of some possible changes. And the third point is about the systemic approach. The report we are launching today also gives recommendations that go beyond research and innovation in energy and mobility, considering research and innovation policy more broadly. It is simply not sufficient to consider energy and mobility or any policy in isolation. In particular, the report notes that becoming more sustainable and safeguarding security and prosperity requires an improved policy coordination and coherence between research and innovation and other sectoral policies. Over the coming year or so, as we develop the next framework programme and the EU's long-term budget, it is crucial that we are guided by a systemic, whole-of-government approach. In conclusion, let me once again thank the authors for the work. We are at a critical juncture for the European Union, faced with mounting challenges and, of course, no easy answers. President von der Leyen calls on Europe to stick together and dare to think big and act big. This report provides us with useful ideas and recommendations to translate such lofty ambitions into action. And I now have the pleasure to pass the floor to Pierpaolo Cazzola, co-director of the ITS Davis European Transport and Energy Research Center, University of California, Davis, and co-author of the expert report, to present the report to you.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I hope I can live up to the challenge of introducing you to this work, and also on behalf of the other authors. Frank will be here later for the panel, and I'm tasked here to walk you through our findings. So I'll start with the outline. So we looked into 4 contextual changes in an evolving world. We also looked into key challenges for energy and mobility systems and associated research and innovation policies. We outlined a vision and overarching policy objectives, and then based on that, we identified research and innovation priorities for energy and mobility. And then, indeed, we came up with policy recommendations and concluding remarks. This is what I'm going to talk through during this presentation. I'll start from the contextual changes in a changing world. So we started by flagging the need to accelerate low carbon transitions. Actually, the evolving developments regarding low carbon transitions, in particular on renewable electricity technology, solar PV, photovoltaic, wind, heat pumps, and also on the evolving developments regarding electric vehicles and their costs. The second change has to do with competitiveness, evolving supply chains, and deindustrialization risks. So we live in a world where clean and low carbon energy became a driver of a global innovation race, and we flagged that with major powers, EU, China, and the US, all developing, stepping up their efforts regarding industrial policy. There's also a security change that we flagged. This relates with global geopolitical tensions and increases that we have seen in that space, and so leading to security risks, and that relate not just with historical energy resources, such as natural gas, but also new resources, in particular minerals and technologies that are needed for the transition, and we flagged here batteries. The fourth change relates with societal acceptance and justice, so equity. The issue here is that environmental policy and low carbon innovation are subject to societal resistance in some places, and because they may be paired with equity challenges. So it's going to be important to navigate this additional change. So this societal change, and we flag here the need to take that into account. These changes are also have been also identified by major reports that have been already mentioned. The LETA report, which clearly flags the changes in the international scenarios, the competition, the resurgence of power politics. The Draghi report, which has been focusing specifically on the competitiveness challenges for Europe and calling for a new industrial strategy to accelerate decarbonization, focus on innovation, and achieve a better alignment of fiscal, trade, and foreign policies. Ursula von der Leyen also highlighted in her political guideline the role of science and technology in this space, so research and innovation as a key pillar of what can help Europe overcome the challenges associated with these changes. And the HATO report includes a strategic recommendation on maximizing the impact of EU research and innovation programs. So we built on this and focus specifically our thoughts on the topics of mobility and energy. So what you listen today, it's essentially our reflections given these contextual changes, but with specific thoughts on energy and mobility. And so paired with these changes, we identify challenges going forward. The first one is on the need to accelerate low carbon transition. And so the challenge there is to ensure that we can continue to achieve progress in reducing the carbon intensity of our economy in the EU. The second challenge is related with competitiveness, supply chain, and industrialization. The issue there for Europe is the fact that it's not only just a risk; it's a fact of the EU falling behind with respect to major competitors, in particular China. The chart here shows the number of clean energy patents developed over the course of the past 25 years, and clearly this shows a gap, and it's just one of the key indicators that we flagged to see the issue of Europe falling behind. We also identified challenges related with security and social acceptance, so related with the changes we mentioned before. The issue related with security are the impact. So the challenges related with the technology transition and the impacts on international relations. There are aspects also related with dual use. The technology transition also affects technology that have relevance for the military space, not just the civil space. So it's important to make sure that we master the transition, we navigate this transition in a way that doesn't leave us deprived of capacity to have domestic capabilities to respond in case of security threats. And also climate change itself is also seen as a security issue from a military standpoint. Regarding social acceptance and justice, we have seen these translating into evolving political developments, increased populist politics, which risk to weaken proposals to promote a positive agenda on innovation and environmental policies, and including proposals to consider degrowth, sufficiency and well-being, which have positive sides, but also come with risks related with the need to seize opportunities from growth to actually cover the cost of social welfare, low carbon transition, and defense upgrades, as well as equity-related challenges. So these are the key challenges we've been considered, and based on all this, we outlined the following vision for the future of the EU energy and mobility systems. So we recommend, so we essentially charted this way forward looking at systems that need to be low emission, cost competitive, energy and resource efficient, integrated and flexible. We consider that this system need to involve a significant degree of European manufacturing. That's also relevant from, in particular from that security standpoint mentioned earlier. We consider that the energy and mobility system need to be reliant on diversified supply chains, and that the capacity to manufacture domestically low carbon technology needs to grow, given the gap seen so far. And we consider the need for this system to deliver other societal benefits, including cleaner air and improved affordability, so also to be capable to address the equity challenges. For this purpose, we identified 9 innovation pathways. They are listed here in the table. So these are include system integration enabled by digital technologies, infrastructure innovation, decarbonizing electricity production, in particular with solar PV and wind, since they are cheaper technologies. Then the transition regarding low and medium temperature heat in heats building and in buildings and industry, which is specifically related with energy part of the energy and mobility space. Electric vehicles and electric vehicle batteries, which are relevant also for the mobility side. Biofuels, hydrogen, and hydrogen derivatives, as well as social innovation and mobility as a service. So I'll go through each of these on a high level. Each of the following slides will have a table and some summarizing text. I will not, so the tables summarize our recommendations, our consideration regarding research and innovation actions. I will walk you through without getting into the full detail, and I'm sure there will be chances to continue to debate this in the following panel. So regarding the system integrations, which is the first item that we have, the first pathway we have considered, the key points on this is that it has a significant potential to accelerate low carbon transitions, also in a way that helps achieving better competitiveness. We see challenges for the EU because of the lag with respect to US and China in hardware and software. But we also see capacity in the EU to lead, let's say, or have a significant role in terms of seizing the opportunities from system integrations. There are, on the security side, there are pros and cons. There are risks and vulnerabilities, in particular related with cyber attacks for what concerns digital technologies. And regarding social acceptance, we see issues which are still relatively limited, but that could increase if digital technologies end up increasing inequalities. And so in that case, social acceptance will be will be a challenge. Will increases challenges related with social acceptance will grow, and this needs to be managed. So based on this, we did identify priorities on basic RNI, apply and deployment-oriented RNI. This has been a leitmotif across the whole report. Regarding infrastructure innovation, we flagged the importance of these to adapt industrial capacity to technology shift. We flag in particular the importance of enhancing electricity grids in light of demand growth with the transition. For mobility, we also looked into infrastructural choices that consider reallocation of road space, street redesign, so aspects that relate with the role of different modes of transport. These are crucially linked with infrastructure-related choices and related research in order to optimize the way this can develop. And we also considered infrastructure innovation with respect to their role in terms of resilience in case of conflicts, and with respect to the challenges related with climate change, climate-related hazards, and the need to anticipate them. We have seen very recently in Spain major impacts, and so infrastructural innovation also need to be capable to handle those kind of challenges. A third pathway I have listed here is decarbonizing electricity with solar PV and wind. So these I mentioned earlier are key technologies because they are low cost and low carbon at once. They can actually be instrumental to increase competitiveness. They are an opportunity in this respect. There are also challenges because, the cost of solar PV and wind depend on endowment, and there are other parts of the world with high endowment. So Europe may be exposed to risk of being outcompeted in other parts of the world when it comes to technologies related with solar PV and wind, or electricity generated from those. There is also a strong advantage acquired by China, in particular for solar PV manufacturing, less so in wind turbine manufacturing, where the EU has been traditionally leading, but its leadership is eroding. We see a general energy security advantage from renewable energy, in particular solar PV and wind, but also risks, and the risks are related with new supply chains, the fact, let's say, the competitive disadvantage acquired, characterizing the EU system compared with other global competitors so far. And on the social acceptance, we see generally a positive attitude, although there could be challenges, especially if the EU doesn't seize opportunities to boost its own industrial development by intercepting positively the development of these technologies, which will be crucial for the growth of to achieve let's say, the alignment with net zero ambitions of the European political agenda. I have one more slide here on low and medium temperature heat in buildings and industry. This links in particular to heat pumps. This is an area where, given the possibility to leverage low temperature heat at low cost, despite higher investment costs, heat pumps could actually become a key booster of European competitiveness. Europe also has a sizable share of global heat pump manufacturing. This is important also from an industrial perspective. So heat pumps can be key to reduce energy security risks because they would rely on domestically produced renewable electricity and domestically available heat. They also face challenges related with the endowment and the differences between the EU and other parts of the world. And there's this issue of the higher upfront costs that are relevant for equity-related challenges and come also with social acceptance implications. So these will need to be addressed, and research and innovation can also help with that. A fifth item we identify are electric vehicles and electric vehicle batteries. So clearly electric vehicles are crucial for what concerns the low carbon transition of mobility. They offer major opportunities for greenhouse gas emission savings, also energy efficiency improvement. They can be steered also towards being an asset rather than a liability for electricity grids, so they can come with systemic advantages and lower costs for the system, which is good for competitiveness. The key issue is the fact that on electric vehicles and batteries, China has also gained, similar to solar PV, a competitive advantage. So it's going to be key to make sure that electric vehicles will become an opportunity also for European industrial development. And achieving this is something that will definitely benefit from research and innovation action, but as in the case of solar PV, we'll also need complementary policy, a whole of government approach to actually succeed. Last bullet here is on the equity-related challenges of EVs, also related with high capital costs. It will be important also to shift let's say, the offer of EVs across a wider range of vehicles to respond to that, and research and innovation can also help in that respect. Sixth pathway, biofuels. So they are already part of the road transport fuel mix today. They are a greater part in sectors related with road, and not as much in other sectors like aviation and shipping. They have a capacity to abate greenhouse gas emission, but that depends on the pathway of production. Key points that we flag in the analysis is the need to try to avoid focusing them on modes where they could be outcompeted by other solutions, in particular electrifications. So we flag the importance of a shift towards aviation and shipping. We see them as valuable to help handling risks of asset stranding for combustion-based technology, but as I said earlier, this is only true if electrification would not outcompete them. So that's a challenge, definitely something to be taken into account. The social acceptance is generally positive, but also dependent on risks related with land use requirements, because biofuels do tend to come with larger land use requirements compared with other low emission technologies. Hydrogen. So we have a full pathway regarding this with, let's say, mixed messages. Currently, hydrogen is entirely produced, I would say, almost entirely produced from natural gas, and it's not a low carbon energy carrier. So there needs to be a shift towards a low carbon energy production. This is technically feasible, and it can offer energy diversification opportunities, but it also comes with challenges, in particular related with lower efficiency compared to with direct electrification. Hydrogen, we see it as an option that can compete effectively to decarbonize chemicals, fertilizers, and steel making. Those are probably the sector where the research and innovation actions can help with the deployment, on the deployment side, and acceleration. For buildings and transport, we have seen, we flagged several assessments that are skeptical on a quick adoption of hydrogen as an energy carrier because of greater competitiveness of electrification, especially when it comes to, in the case of transport, in the case of road. There could be other applications, again, where electrification has less capacity. Hydrogen could become instrumental to lower especially low carbon hydrogen, to lower the carbon intensity of fuels, and this is especially relevant for shipping and aviation. There are potential social acceptance risks related with safety and environmental risks. Hydrogen is a greenhouse gas itself, so it's important to manage leaks. Research and innovation actions need to respond to these kind of considerations. Regarding I have two more slides on the pathways. The 8 is on social innovation. So social innovation have a potential to address institutional and user-based barriers to sustainable transitions. I've been contributing to suggest a more radical transformation of societies. They come with security advantages because they can enable reduced demand of energy and resources. But they also come with challenges because they may also induce lower growth. And so lower growth means not only that this may not resonate with the wider public, but also that this could lead to lower fiscal space to handle equity-related transition. So there are pros and cons, and it's important for research and innovation actions to increase and improve the understanding that we have of these dynamics, and in order to maximize the benefits that can be achieved from social innovation and reduce potential drawbacks. One last pathway is specifically focused on mobility as a service. So we frame this as a specific case of social innovations. This is based on a single digital customer interface to source and manage travel-related activities. It aims essentially to improve the integration of public transport mode and other ways to move around, including commercial transport services. Whether or not MaaS can lead to emission reduction really depends on its capacity to take people away from more carbon-intensive modes towards less carbon-intensive modes. There is a mixed record regarding this. Generally speaking, as long as MaaS boosts the, let's say, the interest, the appeal of public transport, it can achieve that. MaaS is, in public transport in general, relate with local services, so they are less vulnerable related to in terms of supply chain disruptions. Still reliant on digital infrastructure, so exposed to cyber attack. And generally speaking, as this is something that can foster an equitable way to move around, and also in an affordable manner, we don't see mass as something that is particularly exposed to social acceptance problems. So the research and innovation action need to try to maximize, again, the benefits that can be acquired, the capacity of mass to lead to net savings in greenhouse gas emissions, and to enhance, let's say, better equity, more equitable access to mobility. I'm almost done. I have a couple of slides on our conclusions. So based on all these analyses. So the first one is that we consider the need, we recommend to increase public research and innovation support in a strategic manner, with a focus on achieving price and performance parity to leverage the power of markets. Some of the points made earlier, in particular, for example, on the capacity of hydrogen to be competitive in some sectors rather than another, is something that I think relates very closely with these. A key question is, can we afford research and innovation support for options that stand little chances to actually be competitive? Should we rather focus on spending public money on cases where we do see structurally greater chances? And our answer is yes, that is probably a better idea. Even though there is still a role for research and innovation to make sure that it can help us achieving a faster development, like by seizing new generations of technologies, and so move faster in trying to make sure that we can achieve also a more diverse offer of technological options. The second bullet is the need to find a new balance between the protection of existing assets and the creation of new assets. One example there could be biofuels. Biofuels could be a way to save, let's say, existing asset combustion related by basically lowering the carbon intensity of the fuels. The key challenges are, can we supply enough for that? Or and will this option be cost competitive against other solutions, in particular electrification? The risk there is that by focusing only on technologies that protect existing assets, we completely miss the next generation of technologies, and we get outcompeted on those. So our assessment is that there's a need to look more into seizing opportunities from next generations. I'm thinking in the case of biofuels on electric mobility, missing opportunities to actually seize the positive side. Also from an industrial development perspective, on electric mobility would be a big risk. I have two more bullets here on the need to align basic research for disruptions, applied research and innovation as a key enabler of change, and then also complement these with deployment-focused research and innovation actions to scale up resilient innovation, so innovation that have high chances to be in large demand. The final bullet here is on specific research and innovation action regarding social innovation, and the idea of aligning social innovation with environmental security benefits, and also a better understanding of the dynamics of systemic transitions. Last slide with the last four bullets. So the first one here is on the need to align research and innovation actions with other policy tools that address specific weaknesses, in particular to correct market failures in cases where the market does not deliver in investing in areas where that come with better competitiveness and essentially offer opportunities to bridge some of the challenges we flagged. So these may involve strategic infrastructure-related choices. We have a bullet on the need to take specific research and innovation actions on social innovation this is a mistake. It was already covered earlier, and we have a bullet on the importance to consider institutional changes to leverage large-scale opportunities, including better coordination between the EU and its own member states. We flag risks related with a mismatch in terms of research agendas. It's important to make sure that there is a better coordination to achieve a greater impact in that respect. And our last bullet is on the need to foster the contribution of new stakeholders, in particular startups. This links to the earlier bullet I mentioned on the need to find a new balance between the protection of existing assets and the creation of new assets. We see the role of startups as something that can help move towards a greater focus on the creation of new assets, which is important to take, to enjoy a positive dynamic driven by the growth of these new assets as they get deployed into the economy. I close here. I hope I wasn't too long, and I'm happy to hand it over to the panel discussion, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of insightful thoughts from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pier Paolo, for walking us through the key messages from this high-level expert report. So now we are moving to our panel discussion, and we have an amazing panel lined up for you here in the RTD studio in Brussels. And it's my big pleasure and honor to present the panelists to you. We have first Floor Alkemade. Welcome in Brussels. Floor, you are a full professor and chair economics and governance of technological innovation at the Eindhoven University in the Netherlands, and also a member of the expert group that is advising the European Commission on the socio-economic impact of research and innovation called ESIR. So a big welcome to you. Then we have Henriette Spira, Director General for Innovation and Technology at the Austrian Federal Ministry for a very long title, Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology. So warm welcome to you as well, Henriette. Then we have our own Director General from DG Research and Innovation, Marc Lemaitre. Warm welcome to you as well in your own home here in Brussels. And last but not least, we have the co-author of the report, one of the experts, Frank Geels. And Frank, you are also an Eddie Davis Professor for Sustainability Transitions at the Manchester Business School. And this is at the University of Manchester. So great to have you all here. I think we heard a very good overview already from Pier Paolo here. So there are basically 4 characteristics for energy transition and mobility transition, 9 innovation pathways with priorities for basic applied research and deployment, and I noted 7 policy recommendations. I just would like to start with a warm-up question to all of you. What did you take away from this report? What resonated most with you? And maybe I can start with you, Floor.
Yes, thank you, Rosalinde, and thank you for the invitation to read this very interesting and also timely and highly relevant report. What I appreciate very much about the report is that it not only paints a very clear picture of what needs to happen to accelerate the energy and mobility transition in terms of R&I and innovation efforts in general, looking not only at basic research but also at what's needed in deployment, for example. But it also does this in the context of concerns about competitiveness and concerns about security of supply. And with that, I think this report is an important first step to make decisions or evaluate trade-offs between these different dimensions in a more systematic way. So that I like very much. Two key things that that really caught my attention and that were maybe a bit more between the lines is first is in some areas, for example in batteries, the need to also innovate around existing concerns in supply chains, for example looking into alternative battery chemistries. I think this could really be a target for innovation efforts and could have been emphasized a bit more. And another challenge that arises for me, so the first innovation pathway does address the role of digital technologies and AI. But the promise of these technologies, both in the energy transition, where it enables the integration of intermittent renewables, the mobility transition, where it may eventually help to get integration between modes, but even autonomous driving, but also the integration of these these two transitions and large efforts in demand reduction, where you can maybe help reduce demand in a way that it does not compromise comfort levels or other perceived attractiveness of the system too much. That potential is very large, but it's not yet realized. So there's a huge innovation challenge there, but at the same time, we lag behind as EU in these technologies, and it's also an area where we are quite vulnerable in terms of dependence on firms and technologies that are maybe difficult to govern. So the challenge there is not only to catch up, but also how do we do this in a way that the increased presence of digital and AI really safeguards European values almost by design. So I think there's that challenge is really one that requires attention.
Great, thank you very much, Floor. Harriet, what did you take away?
Yeah, well, a lot of things. It's a long report. I learned before that actually it should be 25 pages. Now it's 110 I had. So thank you very much for a very detailed analysis. Well, there are, of course, a couple of factual things. We saw that on the slides too. The rise of China in clean energy patterns was absolutely striking. The need to invest in research infrastructure and how much that is was absolutely striking. The inclusion of the social and justice dimension I liked a lot. There's a big debate on expanding TRLs to SRLs, so that kind of feeds into that. I also like the idea of framing transition pathways, not just setting objectives, but actually showing the pathway. And the contextual challenges are chosen very well, I think. Of course, I look at this from the perspective of a policymaker. So what really struck me, to be honest, and I have to admit now that I've been in this field for quite some time, what really struck me is that the kind of all the keywords I saw in all the different transition pathways, and I think we can discuss whether some are missing. There's nothing on rail, nothing on automated mobility, but that debate you will get anyways. But all the different buzzwords have been around for a long time. Maybe apart from AI, but if you had read a report like this for 10 years, it probably would have contained a lot of different buzzwords, even though they're now framed in a more systemic way, which I really applaud. So there's a lot on the what that's been around for a very long time. When it gets really interesting, when it comes to the why, to the invest more strategically, align policy, whole of government approach, institutional changes, all these things that are kind of put in the last 10 pages. That's actually where it gets very interesting. And that's where, from a policymaker's perspective, and I think the same goes for the European Commission, we have to think in really new ways. And there, I think we need a lot more debate on this how, apart from the very detailed what we get in this report.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Henriette. Definitely some food for further thoughts and discussion. But first, Mark, let's go to you.
Well, I'd like to start by really congratulating the four authors of this report, including the one to my left, and of course Gianpaolo for having made a very crisp presentation of these 110 pages. I welcome it because it's timely. It arrives at a juncture where we will have, as policymakers, to reflect very, very hard about future choices. And the reason for that is indeed explicited very well in the report. You call them contextual changes, but these are daunting changes for the EU in particular. And in fact, I might have added a fifth one, which is our demographic trends in Europe, which are also quite unique and which don't help generally. I really enjoyed the richness of the report. It will give us really a lot to chew on as policymakers. I would like Henriette just for now want to pick up two or three things which I believe are extremely valid reminders to us as policymakers. The first one, social acceptance, equity, justice. A second one is the need to think of a research and innovation agenda which goes from basic research to deployment reflections. The third one is that we should keep in mind, as enthusiastic as we might be about the technological possibility of certain things, of the cost competitiveness of what we are working on. We should, especially as Europe, not forget that today we are in a very bad place when it comes to the cost of our energy, and we need to reflect on how we can improve things from that point of view, not make things worse by, I don't know, by thinking about e-fuels, thinking about many things. I'm not, writing off e-fuels, but we need to think about the economics of it, no doubt. And this is where the report also asks this very tough questions for policy making. What balance to strike between existing and therefore potentially stranded assets and investing in the future in new things, which will indeed create losses for some. So for all these aspects, I think we are extremely well served by this report at this point in time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So this is very nice compliments, Frank, to you and the other experts. I would ask you, maybe you could briefly react to what you heard. And I also see that we received some comments from our audience through Slido. In particular, the audience would like to know, why were these 9 pathways selected? Could there be others? And there's also a question from the audience whether this framework could be used to explore system transition in other sectors like food and farming. So maybe if you could give a brief reaction to what you heard here from our panelists, and maybe also pick up on these 2 comments that we received through Slido.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, panelists, for the appreciative comments. I was particularly intrigued by Henrietta's comment that indeed the 9 pathways that we've chosen are not that new. They've been around for a very long time. So what is interesting is, why is Europe not succeeding as much as it probably should in those 9 pathways? And we have read a lot of previous policies over the last 10 years, and I was continued to be struck by a sense of complacency, if I may say, with Europe congratulating itself on its leadership. And it was indeed a leader on sort of the policy dimension, setting ambitious targets with the Green Deal and even before that. But it's not been a leader very much in sort of the manufacturing. And even in the deployment, we were initially a leader in solar, but we have been overtaken by China, also in the deployment side, but particularly, I think, in the manufacturing. And I think that's really led to the wake-up call, which we try to give, but has also been given by the Letta report and the Draghi report. I think there's been a real realization that, no, actually, we're not leading in many of these 9 pathways. So I think that's intriguing. And we do a lot of foresight. We've done loads of foresight exercises in the past 5 or 10 years. And again, then you wonder why have been sort of outcompeted in many of the areas. Because China has not been secretive about its plans. They've been signaling this for more than 10 years, and they've been playing the long game. Maybe we underestimated China, because of course for a long time the idea was, well, China does cheap things. They're good, but they're not so good in quality, so we don't need to worry. They need us to do the thinking, and then they do it cheaper. But that narrative is no longer true. They've really upgraded, so they're doing cheap and they're doing better in many of the areas. Particularly the electric vehicles, of course, are not only cheaper, they're also better, particularly in the IT set, and they're now outcompeting the European ones. So I think the wake-up call then is, we are in a really pivotal moment. If we don't want to decline further, which I think is the Draghi warning, we are now being outcompeted at real risk of losing market share. And the European car industry accounts for 6% of jobs in Europe. So that's a real lot. If we lose even half of those jobs, we are in a real problem. So Europe now really needs to think how are we gonna respond to this? And I think there the challenge is we don't have as much money as the US. The US has done the Inflation Reduction Act, spending $369 billion to get their industries going. We don't have as much money, but also if we have the R&D, I think it needs to be linked much more strongly to industrial policy. We really need to think, does it make sense to just spend nice R&D money and have patents and good publications, but not actually products? So our pitch in the report is we need to be much stronger in actually supporting those areas where we stand a chance to compete. And that means taking a hard look also maybe at where we cannot compete. Maybe we should not spend the money there. We've tried to do a little bit, I'll take Floor's point and also we've tried to do a little bit, and that's what we could have done. We could have probably been a bit sharper in saying where are we good, where are we not so good. So I like Floor's point as well. Maybe sometimes we need to acknowledge, well, we can't actually compete in lithium-ion batteries. We are so far behind. Or in solar, where China is producing 95% of the main technologies. So there may be the main technology we cannot compete, but maybe there's alternative pathways. Lithium-ion is only one, but now the next battery cycles is probably solid state or sodium. In solar, similarly, there are perovskites, I think. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, but there's alternative. So we need to, I think, more cleverly think for and this, because it used to be, we don't be technology neutral, we don't want to make choices. But I think now we're in a different kind of era, and I think Europe has to be more strategic. We don't just want to spend the money across the board, or in areas where we can do nice research and nice papers, but we actually cannot compete. So that's, and I think, again, we've done a good first step, was Floor's words, and I agree. We lack the time to go deeper. I only recently found out we got the Clean Energy Technology Observatory, CETO, which is linked to the JRC, which is doing wonderful work in really writing good reports for each of these pathways, analyzing who's the leader, which companies, where are we strong, where are we not so strong. We are doing a bit of that. We could have done a bit more, but we lacked the time and the space. It was supposed to be a 20-page report. But I think this is important, really important to do for Europe, to think more strategic. And this is a bit different, because it used to be, okay, we don't want to make the choices, we leave it to the market. But since we have limited resources compared to China, also in the R&D space, we show the figures in the report, we don't have as much money. Also in the deployment, we don't have as much money. So we need to think much more strategically, where can we actually compete? And that's why we need to, in some areas the race we are far behind, in other areas the race is more open. And I think we try to identify those areas. I think that's really what we now need, and it needs to be linked much more strongly to industrial policy, competition policy, finance policy. Again, the Draghi also makes this point. And this point has also been made over and over again, against the silos. So again, I agree, Henriette, it's not entirely new, but the urgency is now really strong. And I think we really need to start doing something different. So I do hope, I think today actually this is also being discussed at the High Commission level. I really think, well, we try to give the sort of wake-up call that this needs to be done much more strategically. There were some questions on the slide, or could you remind me? One was...
Yeah, so one question was, you selected 9 pathways, could there be more? And there was a question whether these pathways could be used as a blueprint also for other sectors like food and farming.
Yeah. No, there could be more. Initially we also wanted to look at energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage. But we felt, well, since we are, the remit of the report initially was more on the radical type of innovations, energy efficiency tends to be more incremental. That doesn't mean it's not important. Because I think there's a lot of space in buildings in particular, in heating, where energy efficiency remains incredibly important. But we decided not to focus on energy efficiency, and carbon capture and storage we also decided not to focus on. So yeah, there are more pathways. We're not saying these are the only 9 ones. And the remit was focused on energy and mobility, but I think food equally incredibly important sector, incredibly interesting as well. You need to look at the whole chain, all the way from food supplies to the farmers, to the food processing, to the consumption and the supermarkets. Lots of jobs there as well. Lots of competition going on. So I think maybe this would be a next report. It could, the framework can equally be done. I'd say the competitiveness I mentioned, the social acceptance in particular is much more strong. We've seen the farmers on the streets, but also the social dimension. There are things happening with diets and consumer patterns. a little bit, but it also gets really close to people's cultural identity. You know, should they eat less meat or not? You know, this is really deeply ingrained in national identities. Things are beginning to change around healthcare in particular, and we need to eat less meat. But it's only a fraction of the population so far. Whether or not this will spread more widely remains to be seen. And again, there are policymakers want to push, but I think the wider message, you want to push, but if you push too hard, we've seen this in Germany, if you decide to phase out gas boilers, this can be used, you know, this can create a lot of antagonism as well. So I think policymakers are cautious that they want to push, but not alienate sort of the wider public and be seen to do things that are really, you know, you don't want to go entirely against what the wider public wants. So I think that's why food would be really interesting. Some of the dilemmas, not dilemmas, the 4 dimensions are playing out in a slightly different way, but food would definitely be important. I would also add energy-intensive industry, which we didn't go in any depth, which touched on it a little bit. Of course, that's also actually part of energy, but it's also kind of a different beast. You know, energy-intensive steel, petrochemicals, oil refining, all these big industries would equally be interesting to look at in a bit more depth.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Frank. And I think some very clear messages emerging. You know, and I think it's a really, really important question. You know, the 9 pathways in principle are not new. Why didn't we succeed so far? And I think it's really striking sometimes when we also read policy documents that we prepared, for instance, on the Energy Union 10 years ago. And, you know, you look at what we identified as European Commission in terms of challenges. It seems that 10 years later, our challenges are still the same. So, you know, a bit of a wake-up call from you, Frank. You know, we need to do things a bit different. We need to focus more. If I understood you correctly, you say, okay, maybe we should abandon this technologically neutrality. Maybe we should now really start to focus where we are investing in research and innovation, also looking at where Europe can be competitive. How do the other panelists feel about this type of statements? Do you agree? Should we now really do something radically different and start to radically prioritize and only focus on investing in specific strategic technologies where we as Europe can also be cost competitive? Or should we continue to be technologically neutral? Does any of the other panelists would like to come in here?
Yes, sure. So I think the report actually gives a very good example there when we look at green hydrogen. So yes, we are all, of course, aware and concerned of the risks of not being technology neutral and maybe, yes, selecting the stranded assets of the future. But at the same time, we do know with the knowledge that we have today that some technologies will be very difficult to get cost effective in certain domains. And choosing there might actually reduce the policy uncertainty that is needed to leverage investments in these technologies. So a very clear statement on we recommend to use green hydrogen there and there, but maybe not in the built environment or even in transport, might actually accelerate the transition to electric trucking on the one hand, and also the investment needed in the energy-intensive industry to go for that green hydrogen. So it's a little bit different than making an explicit technology choice, but it is, yeah, as you recommend, also discouraging certain pathways for further exploration, and that is, I think, already a little bit of a divergence from current policy.
Exactly.
Maybe 3 points. First of all, actually, my point that some of the content is very similar to 10 years ago is not even meant as a criticism, because we are in the arena of research, right? So if we put vehicle to grid on a nice slide 10 years ago, we're probably a lot further on now. So actually, this just shows that there's been a lot of the value of collaborative research, to my mind, because actually none of the transition pathways you showed work without very good collaborative research between industry, academia, university societies, etc., etc. So just to end up on this point. 2 more points. Technological neutrality. You know, We have a hydrogen advisory board in Austria, and our national hydrogen policy, which is obviously closely aligned with the European one. And a former management director of one of the big energy companies leads it, and he always calls it, we need technological clarity, right? And I really like this phrase, because just to stay at the hydrogen example, what we then go on to say in our national strategy is very similar to what you say in your pathway. Be a bit more careful in where you use the stuff, right? Maybe not use taxpayers' money funding research for using hydrogen in passenger vehicles, where we already know that this is really not the most effective thing to do. Really choose more carefully, right? So I really like this kind of technology clarity approach coming from a good analysis of where we actually want to be and what are good use cases, right? The third one, pick and choose technology. Should we do that? Is it kind of the policymaker's dream, right? To have your 10 technologies, or the economic security strategy names 10 critical technologies, 4 specifically critical technologies. We did the exercise in Austria just now, actually. I heard the presentation on Monday on key enabling technologies, because we know that there's a lot of key enabling technologies, over 40, I think, and as a very small member state, we of course want to be sure. So where to invest, right? Pick 4 or 5, and it turns out to be very difficult because first of all, in the analysis, you very often look at the past. You look at data from the past. This is also kind of a slight criticism we often tend to hear from Draghi, right? Because it's kind of what you mean by strategic investment is look to the future. Actually make assumptions on what different futures could be, and then build your pathway, right? So it's very difficult to go and say, well, we are strong in this, that, and the other. Let's build our strength there, because you miss. That's what we found. You miss the kind of nature of all the enabling technologies there are, which might not be so clear and shiny, right? So I think our approach, and we try to also really push this at OECD level. OECD in April had a whole declaration for the transformative agenda. We call it transformative innovation policy. It's just be a lot more clearer, and then you also get to the role of government. I won't go into that now. Just be a lot more clearer on the kind of problems you want to solve. Be very clear in framing the problem, and then research industries, etc., will come up with the solutions, right? That will be my quick take.
So maybe you're going here into kind of like a mission-oriented research innovation approach.
Yeah.
Mark, technological clarity. How does that resonate with you?
Well, probably it's a politically astute term. But I'd like to just start by certainly immediately embracing the last suggestion of Henriette, because before thinking about making choices, I do think that policymaking should be first and foremost about setting objectives, and then these objectives should not in a dirigiste kind of way, should be put to the world of research and innovation with sufficient policy clarity, because I think that especially in times of need for deep transformations, you cannot afford to have policy uncertainty. You need to have a very clear set of goals which everyone can then refer to and orient themselves to. But I do believe also that beyond that, and it brings us back to what makes sense, what is cost efficient, which we discover over time, obviously, that there are for Europe probably some very uncomfortable truths now. And it is that indeed electrification, is a very, very big part of the transformation, and potentially bigger than we would have liked given our inherited assets. Because for Europe it might mean, Frank was referring to the importance of the automobile industry in Europe, it might mean some significant, very significant, not only transition costs, but need to build up from scratch again comparative advantages that we had as Europe until now through especially the combustion engine and the strong engineering expertise in Europe. And here I do see that Europe today is struggling. It is struggling exactly with this with this tension between trying to limit the incumbents' losses and at the same time seeing that it is difficult to reconcile that with cost competitiveness and with our policy objectives overall. So there, I do think that beyond setting these objectives, etc., we will also have to make some choices on where we put especially public funding. And to me, it will have to be guided by the best possible forecast of what will really win the day ultimately, and will win the day in the market, obviously.
Yeah, no, I like both your comments, Floris, as well. Your point on comparative advantage is really important, and I think our report tries to make the argument. Again, I've looked at the report. Also, competitiveness is not a new thing. That also goes back 10 years. But most of the reports, when they talk about competitiveness, you read very little on the competitors. You know, lots of in Europe we're really strong in this, really strong in that, we're good. And you rarely, okay, that's great, but what about comparative? That's comparative advantage compared to others. Even the drug report, very little. Okay, what does China do? What does the US do? What do other countries maybe do? I think that's what I mean also with choice. You need to look at your own capabilities, of course, and you need to build on your strengths. What are we good at? But in relation to others, and if you're good at something, but others are even better, you may say, well, actually, maybe we can't catch up. Well, again, you need to assess, is the distance 90% or is the distance 10%? If it's 10%, you may say, okay, let's try to catch up. But if it's 90%, you could say, well, actually, we can't really catch up. And I think that's done too little. And I think that's what I mean with choices, not only in terms of visions and objectives, we would like to have more renewables and more solar, but also can we in that space compete to others? And I don't only mean in the industrial space, in the production, but also in the R&D. So solid state is a big thing in batteries, but also there, CATL, which is in China, is already almost doing it. So, you know, we can try to catch up, but even there we are behind. And I think it's more difficult in that kind of space to get reliable data, but it can be done. And I think that's what I mean. I think to take the comparative advantage more serious, not only what are we good at, what would we like to do. We would like to have battery plants in Europe, and we are going to build 20 or 30 big giga plants. But those are lithium-ion batteries. They will be twice as expensive as the ones we're going to import from China. They can do it much cheaper. So I can understand why we're doing this, because, you know, it's important. We don't want to lose the car industry. But the batteries that we will be making in Europe are going to be more expensive. And okay, that's fine within Europe, because we are putting tariffs up now. We make the Chinese more. But we cannot compete internationally with those batteries. Sorry, it's not. It's just, you know, we are being outcompeted on cost with China. So I think there's a real balance also between open strategic autonomy. We want to keep some industry alive, protect some assets, and maybe help them transform. But we also want to sort of compete. And they're not always, you also want low cost, because if it's low cost, the transition goes faster. So the 4 dimensions we have, there's also dilemmas. I think I like Floor's point in the beginning. The report also tries to show it's not always win-win-win. which is what we would like to believe for a long time. But now we see, no, there are clear dilemmas. If you produce it yourself, it's probably going to be more expensive than importing it from China, and therefore it will go slower. So I think, again, there's a big trade-off and dilemma to deal with. But I think that's whole comparative dimension, I think I would like to see more strongly in not only what are we good at, but can we still actually compete to others? That's what I would like to inform with the, and there's the dilemma, of course, in picking winners, and do we have enough capabilities, and is it 5 or is it 40 pathways? I appreciate that dilemma for policymakers, and we don't say enough on how to do this. I take that point as well, but I think just bringing in this realization that you need to look better at your competitors, what they're doing, and can we, I think that has not been done enough. If I look back at the last 10 years, it's not been done enough. Too much focus on our own strengths, what would we like to do, and not enough strategic wisdom.
Beautiful. And I also see that we have also our audience to say, if you have a comment from the audience that says the best technologies must be selected by scientists, industry and the users, not by politicians and bureaucrats. So I think that's also a very clear message from one of our audience, but focusing on our comparative advantage, a very clear message from you, Frank. I would like to move now to another issue, and that is the money that we need. It's very clear that we need to continue to massively invest in research and innovation as a European Union, both on the public and on the private side. I mean, we all know the Draghi figures there. The question that I have for you is, what can we do at EU level to really leverage the investments in research and innovation, both from the public and from the private sector? And here, of course, we have a bit of a more complicated landscape compared to the US, for example. But what can we do better? Henriette.
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks again, Frank, for also pointing out what we haven't looked at until now. I think that was a really valid point. You know, looking more at competitors and being more strategic about it. And I think that's in my personal work, something I find is really a management task for the likes of Mark and me, to actually get the strategic knowledge, competencies, capabilities, also into the worlds of the bureaucrats, you know, even though we don't pick and choose technologies, but these are skills, these are competencies, and we really do sometimes lack them. Not only in the area of, I will get to your question, not only in the area of research and innovation, but also when it comes to your question of we do have to invest a lot more money, then the first question I have to ask is RDI the right instrument to solve the problem? Or is it only RDI, or is it only money? That question I find asked not enough, which is why I really liked your which is why I really like the fact that you embedded in your report RDI in a broader context. Because we are in a broader context of regulations, incentives, taxes, infrastructures, etc., etc. And in order to make RDI relevant, we have to know about these, right? At least know about these first step. We do have, and I don't want to go into the bragging mode of saying all the things we do very well, but I do have to say that some things we do okay-ish, right? The joint undertakings at the European level, the research partnerships, right? You can criticize each and every one of them in certain aspects, but we have stuff, right? We have stuff to align the 10% budget at the European level spends compared to the 90% you point that out in your report member states spend. So of course there's a huge issue of how to leverage, how to combine, how to collaborate. And I think the European partnerships, bureaucratic as they may be now, we all know that, but they're a very good attempt at getting better at this. Something like the joint European Forum on the IPCIs is an attempt, actually a member state attempt, led by Austria, I shall say, a member state attempt to say, look, if you want to be more strategic in choosing the technologies and supply chains we need to be strong at, and the IPCIs are strategic about it, we probably need some kind of forum where we have a strategic debate of both the European Commission, different director generals, not just one, and the member states. That's also working well, and we are getting better at becoming quicker in identifying where we want to go, right? Again, I have to stress, collaborative research, even though there is a lot of buzz going on about, nothing coming out of it. I simply do not believe it. I think we've maybe not been good enough at, telling the impact stories, both industry and research organizations. But this has a really huge value also for, and then you have to frame the problems right? So that's the things that are already working well. And then for the second part, and Marc really knows me because I'm always going on about the how we work together. This is about people. If we say whole of government, if we say this policy or that policy or this DG or that DG, it's about people working together. And we do have to, and this is where your institutional changes recommendation really comes in, we probably have to become a lot better and making people work together a lot more quicker and maybe more problem-oriented, right? CHIPS JU, we are in the frame of energy and mobility, but still microelectronics is a very, very important enabling technology for both mobility and energy. This is an attempt at kind of pooling member state funds, EU-level funds, and also private funds. And my last little point, there was an interesting aspect in your report. It says, in terms of private investments and research, the EU is actually better than the US. Huh? That's interesting.
Thank you, Harriet.
Maybe to add, so I do see that a lot is going well. At the same time, there is a problem of getting research outcomes into startups and especially into scale-ups. And there we do hear quite a bit is that it's simply easier in for example, the US to get the money and also to get through the bureaucratic process. So there I do see the importance of also the recommendations of the Draghi report. In the Asia group, one of our reports on the innovation divide also outlines that there is an inherent clustering in innovation. So it's not all regions can have an AI hub or be excellent in AI, for example. So clustering is to some extent natural in the innovation process, more in some sectors than in others, which means and that it's maybe not so much about making sure that everyone gets a bit of the innovation part, but that the benefits of innovation are divided equally overall. And then you enter this also the recommendations of the Letta report with this link between competitiveness and social cohesion. So there's work to do there. But if we really want to have the kind of digital and AI companies that now only exist outside of Europe, or mostly exist outside of Europe, a bit more integration and joint effort seems to be needed. Yes.
Yeah, joint effort, and I think Henriette mentioned already, an instrument where we bring together EU member states and the private sector. Frank, any more ideas?
I had two comments. So one on the public, one on the private investments. So with the public investments, this is highly controversial, but I think it's time to make hard choices about how we spend the EU budget. I think Draghi is hinting at it, but he knows, of course, this is very insensitive. So why do we spend 30% of the money on the CAP? Is that in this day and age still sort of, I know deep reasons for this. Let's go back to the 80s and deal with between Germany and France, but it's a bit inefficient. Is that really where we want to spend so much money to support agriculture? Is this really a European task, or is this more member state? So that's, I just wanted to raise that. But also Draghi also talks about cohesion funds, the cohesion funds. And there's, again, good reason this has been deeply enshrined in the whole European project. But in business, you try to work, you invest in the areas where you're strong at, the strongest areas. And it is probably fair to say, if you look at the whole of Europe, in the innovation space where we could compete, well, this probably in some member states have more firms, more competitive opportunity than others. So again, I think it's maybe 20 or 30% of the money goes to the cohesion funds, but can we play a bit with that? This is highly sensitive. You might say, well, we should invest more of that money in the strong countries. You know, if you want to compete internationally, we need scale, we need investment, you need to build ecosystems around good universities. This is controversial, but yeah, maybe we need less money in the cohesion and more strategically funded. So that's more about the amount of public money. Then the private money, because indeed, I'm glad you picked that up. Actually, Europe as a whole, including the member states and the Commission, the problem is not so much in the public spending. We on average do about as well as Europe and China. The problem is more the weak private spending. That's where we fall short in Europe, and that's why we spend a lot less than the other countries. That's partly because of the structural makeup of the economy, with a really strong, of whatever it is, these mid-range industries like automotive. But there's also a little bit about the confidence of companies. You know, investment part is driven underlying by confidence. Do we see enough, if we invest in R&D, do we think we can actually have markets? And there is a point, of course, that the markets are too fragmented. Again, Draghi picks up on this. Markets are too fragmented. Companies don't have enough confidence that they will, that they can bring the products to market, that they can compete. So I think what we could do is first de-risking. We need to de-risk the investments. So that's giving more financial support to some of the companies, which of course is exactly what the US is doing with the Inflation Reduction Act, giving them so much, and this is upfront subsidies and financial support to make the capital investments. Europe has got less money to spend, so maybe that is difficult, but de-risking is one way to get more private investment going. The other is also to build markets and to build the whole ecosystem. So Henriette, you've twice now mentioned sort of more collaborative research, and I agree with that, but I would also say innovation is more than just research. Yeah. You know, it's also about finance, and it's about building the whole ecosystem from research to companies to markets. And again, this is precisely where China is so good, where they also build their own markets, and they've got companies, and the companies then build skills, and they feed back to the universities, and they've built a really good ecosystem all the way from markets, market feedback, then you get scale economies, then you get more about applied research, and that then feedbacks to universities. They've got a really effective ecosystem, and we have not managed to do this as efficiently. It's still siloed. Either we do R&D with the universities, okay, we do a bit more collaborative research, but the markets are often missing. The market creation, we need to also, I think part of innovation policy should also be market creation. You know? And I know this is, of course, a different kind of unit, but the whole deployment, ideally it is invention, innovation, diffusion. That's what Schumpeter, the father of innovation studies, talks about. All three should, of course it's all split into different silos, but I think creating better markets, more markets, and creating the feedbacks between them should be part. If companies see that happening, then they are more willing, I think, to put in their money as well. They see the markets materializing, then they will get return on investment. So I think those are the two things, I think, also with the private investment. It's part of the structural makeup, but also we're not so good in, I think, creating the whole ecosystem compared to other countries.
Thank you, Frank. Mark, a reaction to that?
Well, the first basic point would be to say that we've had a policy objective, call it policy objective, for a long time, which is to reach 3% of GDP for R&I. And we have failed pretty miserably over the past 20 years. So to me, it starts here, you know. What should the EU and member states collectively do? This is the first point. And then breaking it down, I do think that because of the present structures of the European economy, we do need more public funding overall for R&I. We don't have the same structure as the US, and so we cannot just dream that it's going to be the private sector that from one day to the next will be bringing us to 3%. So I'm not suggesting it's the public sector that needs to fill the gap, no, but definitely needs to lead and make a part of that shortfall itself. Now, between the EU level and the national level, Henriette reminded of the present equilibrium. To me, if we want very clear policy choices and policy direction at EU level, And as we have common instruments which I think are worth building on and are to some extent better than what is proposed nationally, we should definitely make a particular effort there. So my message is there is a case, I believe, for pooling more money together. Pooling more money together to then have also a stronger federating power with the member states. And no doubt, most of public R&I funding will remain decided at national level. But if we have a slightly stronger collective starting point, we might get more traction also with member states' own decisions to have alignment with the efforts decided. And here I won't go into instruments, but I definitely agree partnerships are a good place to start. My suggestion would be perhaps to reflect on what could be a more systematic approach of basically having a tripartite kind of partnership where you always have EU money, you always have some national monies, and you have industry money. Coming to industry, one point, it was already mentioned, we need to pay attention to is the power of incumbency. And this is perhaps in our partnerships something which is not perfect today. We, of course, join up with existing industry, not with the players of tomorrow. And so we probably should look again to ensure that there is sufficient openness to newcomers in partnership approaches. And then perhaps one word on, innovation efforts. This is where the difference with the US is glaring. We have pocket money when it comes to VC venture capital, as compared to the US and so on. But here, I think we suffer particularly from extreme fragmentation within Europe when it comes to public funding schemes for, startups. Let's simplify, We have, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of public schemes to support startups. And here, again, it's not a suggestion, centralize everything and so on and so forth, but you need more critical mass at the center, and you need, I think, to find a system where you have more of one clear public entry door, and then whatever cannot be funded at central level could then be funded by national means. So to create a more understandable system for all the innovation potential we have in Europe.
Can I react?
Of course.
Can I react to 3 points? First, on you mentioning me emphasizing collaborative research, you're completely right. It's always about building an ecosystem. I just stress this one because I feel that it's kind of overlooked currently. No. And I think we should be very careful in terms of government spending to actually differentiate a bit more systematically between what we call government spending and what we should call government investment. That goes for the European level, and that also goes for the national level. And I think if everyone goes about shouting RD&I innovation is at the heart of what we need in order to become more competitive again, then it just does not make sense to not spend on what we write. That's for that, right? The second ecosystem building point comes in when reflecting upon Mark's comments on the power of incumbents, right? Because I also now see a little bit of a because I see a bit of a dilemma here with you, Frank, saying we should really invest where we are strong. And I mean, every strong company was a startup at some point. Our most successful microelectronics or automotive suppliers in Austria, Germany, and all the other countries were startups 50, 60 years ago, right? So if we want to support with RD&I spending, we cannot kind of now go, all this incremental stuff is not interesting to us, please do something radical. I think that would be very wrong, especially since incremental research really is very important in order to, in the end, get to a product and get to a market. You know, it's not so fancy and shiny as saying, do something radical, do something ARPA style, which, by the way, also would involve serious institutional changes and capacities, which I'm not sure we have now. So I would want to just show that there's a bit of a dilemma. I think you're right, but I think the solution is ecosystem building, really. That one I forgot.
Thank you very much to all of you. And that's also actually a really good segue. I mean, you have the incremental versus disruptive innovation. We also have the dilemma, of course, for our collaborative research, where we need to find a balance between the basic and applied research, according to our legal basis of Horizon Europe. And we actually have a question on Slido on this. What kind of balance should there be between basic research, applied research, and deployment? And how should funding be allocated? And there, maybe, Frank, I could start with you, because in your report for each of the 9 innovation pathways, you actually looked into priorities for basic, applied research and deployment. How would you go about it? What is a balance? Because we all agree we need a balance, but what does that actually mean? How does that translate?
Yeah, it's difficult to answer it across the board because it does vary for the different kind of technologies, and I don't want to go through all the 9 pathways again. But I think it's probably fair to say that overall, in the past, we've not done as much on deployment. You know, this is not the remit of RTD. That deployment is usually done to the sectoral ministries, you know, energy or transport. They should invest in infrastructure or other kind of capital grants, and they do R&D as well, by the way. So, and we are saying there needs to be, our RTD also should do a bit more on deployment, because if you want to accelerate the transition, which is the phase that we are in now, we need to accelerate to reach the climate targets, but also need to accelerate to bring the cost down and to compete. So it's not only for the climate. I think only once you start deploying, then actually costs come down faster. Often then, I mean, that's if you look at solar and wind in electric vehicles. 10 years ago, the economists and the modelers would say, no, don't invest in it, it's too expensive. But policymakers went ahead anyway, and then costs came down much quicker than was anticipated. So I think often it's through deployment, actually doing things in the real world, that you get learning by doing and scale economies, and then the cost of capital comes down because people build confidence and you build those ecosystems, you get the feedbacks. So I think there should be relatively a bit more towards the deployment side, because I do think it's now a race. You know, and the alignment between innovation policy and industrial policy, I think that's, in a way, the overarching pitch of our report. That needs to be much stronger, that link. Of course, we've also always tried to do it, but we've not succeeded that well. I think we need to do much better in that, so therefore a bit more to the deployment. However, also in some of the pathways, we are arguing, we are so far behind, there's no point really to do the deployment. This is what Floor was saying. We need to try to innovate around it. Mm-hmm. So what are the new technologies emerging in the battery phase, which could be the solid state or the sodium batteries, or in the solar, and I'm sure in the hydrogen there's different pathways as well. So maybe in those kind of areas you think, okay, we realize we are behind, we're not going to win this race, but there is another race emerging, which is in an earlier phase, and there actually it's still open. We can compete, which is partly in the system integration. I think we do have a chance there. Not so much in the hardware and the software, but more applying them in energy and transport. And in some of the other pathways as well, there are new pathways opening, and there you would need more basic research to really, but again, then also to build the ecosystem more quickly. I think sometimes we've been a bit too slow. We've created the Battery Alliance, but this was in 2017, I think, that we started doing that, when China was already way ahead, so you could think that we were a bit late maybe in Europe in setting that up. So yeah, I think we need overall a bit more towards the deployment side, but also make the strategic analysis across the pathways that you want to support. And maybe in some areas, actually, it makes sense to do more of the applied, more of the basic research, because we can't compete. But there are other areas that are opening up.
Thank you, Frank. Fleur, would you like to come in here?
Yes, yeah. So I agree, but at the same time, with this deployment, we also see many new innovation challenges emerging, but then a bit more on in the social sciences and humanities. If you talk about new organizations for the energy market, new ways to, so how do the algorithms that govern automated mobility, how do they affect people's lives and the justice implications of that. So there's many new challenges emerging that are a bit between basic and applied research, but that also need to be addressed to make sure that we don't come up with unintended consequences or large societal resistance in some of these transitions. So
Thank you for that. Indeed, I think a very valid point, because there are some that say, well, let's now forget about research and innovation. We need to accelerate. We just need to focus on deployment. And I think it's a really valid point to say, okay, research and innovation will remain important, not only for the longer term, but also for these technologies that already exist, that are ready for deployment, indeed, for the societal dimension. Yes. Harriet, Mark, would you like to come in here, or you're moving on?
The nature of our times really is the simultaneity of the non-simultaneous, right? So, sorry, this is very complicated, but we have a simultaneity of the non-simultaneous in the way. This sounds a lot nicer in German. Let me explain. From the perspective of a Ministry for Climate Protection, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation, Technology, and Space, by the way, we don't mention that. This is just the wrong question. I'm sorry. I really like that you have it in your report, basic, applied, deployment. And of course, we all have to make these budget decisions. But really, I mean, I think especially in energy and mobility, we are already a lot farther than this question, really, because look at, the amount of kind of big laboratories we build in energy, trying out what a new decentralized energy system would look like with prosumers instead of consumers, with decentralized production, which whatever, in Austria alone, we have 6 big regional laboratories on renewable energy, trying it all out. And that's what I mean with the complicated phrase. What happens there is basic research, applied research, and deployment, obviously all at the same time, even though the kind of image of pathways, which I still like, seems to imply a certain linearity. And I just state that this linearity, even though it might exist in a single project, but in the world we live in, it really does not exist to that extent. Same goes for mobility. And here, especially when it comes to EV, we have a very interesting case, I think, and a very critical one to look at, because we did have policy clarity a long time ago. 2009, if I remember correctly, the first CO2 standards came out with 2020 as objectives. Then we had 2014 with the next one. Then we had the Paris Climate Accord in between, right? So, I mean, the policy very clearly pointed in a single direction, and there were reasons why the incumbent industry obviously had big difficulties, very costly transformation, and you earn money with combustion engines, which you earn for the transformation. So, I would say, and then when we finally realized, well, shoot, maybe you should do something, then the Battery Alliance came in. But we had a long history of already regulation and research and I remember a big one in 2009 led by Siemens on EVs and this whole transformation. A couple of companies actually came out of this one, to name a success story. So I'm sorry, I just cannot, I just do think that this is not the right question, especially in the realms of energy and mobility. Mobility as a service, which you mentioned, this is not a digital platform or app. It's a service-oriented mobility system. It's a system in itself, not just a pathway. And in energy, we know from all the different IEA reports about 35% of the technologies are not, which we need for net zero in 2050 still need to be, there still needs to be research. So maybe we can be a bit more technological in the world of energy. But when it comes to mobility, you know, we have technology, we have knowledge, we still need a lot of research, but I'm also missing maybe a pathway to action. And I guess innovation needs to be a lot more ingrained in also the other stuff we see, as I said before, taxes, regulation. If you want to put innovation at the center, you also need to put innovation at the center of your regulatory frameworks to make it all work. Otherwise, you can do all the research you want.
Beautiful. Frank?
Yeah, I think that makes a really, really good point. That you actually, that's the whole point of a system approach to innovation. You know? Also in our report, we still have sort of the different pathways, you know, either on solar or on wind or electric. But that's why we did put system integration as the first one, because actually it's all, you can start deploying more solar and wind, but as you start deploying, it throws up new challenges, usually about the systems. Because it's intermittent renewables, so they need to get into the system, you then need to deal with intermittency. So that then leads to questions around storage, around batteries, around digital grids, smart meters, backup capacity. So you start deploying one technology that throws up, like in any system, if you do something here in the system, usually you get responses there and there and there. So you do deployment here, but that then throws up fundamental questions elsewhere in the system. And then you need to bring it all together. And that's why we try to put the system integration as the first pathway. We should have made the point maybe more clear. Because inevitably for budgets, you still need, this budget is for solar, that one's for wind. And then inevitably you get sort of either it's deployment or applied. But if you think about whole systems, no, some elements are deployment, others are more applied, others are more fundamental. And when you start doing something here, it throws up, and I think because it's really happening now, the transition. I've worked in this space for 20 years, and initially it was all small niches and just peripheral, but you know, renewable electricity across Europe is now 32%. In some countries a lot more. The electric vehicle race is also really beginning. You know, the sales is now 20%, up from about 4 or 5% 3 years ago. Okay, it's slowing down a little bit in Europe, not in China. China keeps growing, so now we get pushback in Europe. But this is going to happen. So it's really interesting, this space, you know, as you say, electric energy and mobility transitions are really happening, less in food and in buildings, a bit slower. And that's why we definitely need a system approach. And it's no longer just about, is it either deployment or applied, it's all of them. So I liked the Germans always have very fantastic philosophical phrases, which are hard to understand for non-Germans. So I like your point, I just wanted to, a very good point, and I just wanted to add, we tried to accommodate it. We could have made it more. That was the ambition of our report. And yeah, thanks for the point.
No, very good. So it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, right? I mean, if we make a change here, then it has like multiple implications on other sides of the cube. So this is really kind of like the systemic approach to research innovation, which Floor, I also think the ISI report group also refers to in the report. So we need a system of systems approach, it seems. But how can we actually do that in research innovation? Does that require a complete new way of thinking, a complete new way of how we approach, at least at EU level, how we do research innovation?
It is challenging to have such a systemic view, but I think there are also some guidelines or heuristics you can use to get more of that systemic perspective. For example, the built environment is a place where many of these challenges come together. So now we talk a lot about, we need this technology and we need that technology, but a more systemic view would not just ask the question, will this innovation effort make this specific technology a little bit more sustainable, but it would rather ask, okay, does this specific technology fit in a new system that really facilitates or stimulates sustainable lifestyles for the people that will use that technology? And in the report, you mentioned the role of infrastructure, specifically on road infrastructures facilitating more active mobilities, but also in all the homes we will build in the next few years, if these are well built in a way that that sustainable lifestyles are stimulated, that the houses require very little energy, that has a very large impact into the future. And so that's an example of a systemic approach, where you don't just think about what is this technology, but what is the system. And I think electric vehicles are an interesting example there. And so it's very nice that there's a lot of advance in electric vehicles. At the same time, I think if all people in Europe would replace their fossil fuel car by electric vehicles, and all people globally that have unmet mobility needs would get an EV, we do not end up with a sustainable mobility system. Because also it requires a lot of space and a lot of materials. And so in a systems thinking view, you would think, okay, what is a sustainable solution that can meet the mobility needs of the people in a sustainable way? And maybe, yes, EVs play a role in that, but not everywhere, probably. So that is an example of how we think this systems innovation. And indeed, following the earlier remarks, it also looks not just at basic research or applied, but it really looks at, okay, what is needed across the board to get this thing off the ground.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Floor. I think you're one of the first people that really explained in a very understandable way what this systems thinking actually means. I mean, I had a few questions before we actually started the launch of this report, because there is this, system transition in the title of the report. So I had already some people asking me, it sounds great, but what does it actually mean? So thank you so much for being so clear in explaining what this systemic approach, actually means, and what type of questions and different questions we need to ask ourselves. I don't know, any other panelists, would you like to come in on this need to move to a systemic approach? Maybe you have a good German quote for this as well.
Well, just do it is actually my very English quote. I usually was. Well, I wouldn't, from a member state perspective, I really wouldn't now say to the Commission, you should do this, that, and the other, because I think that we have a tendency to say systems. And then you also saw that at Commission level, but also nationally, and then be very prescriptive in the types of things we tell single projects to do. Everyone then suddenly needs to be systemic. I think that's a real mistake. So what I can do, Rosalind, is maybe just give you a very practical example of how we did it in Austria, right? In our ministry, we said we have certain key topics, and we frame them as transitions. We say we focus on the energy transition, on the mobility transition, on climate neutral and smart cities, on the circular transition, plus have digital and key enabling technologies, of course, and we also have space and aerospace. And then I made my team do an impact pathway. Took this from Horizon Europe, actually, from a project, and say, okay, so now take your topic and say, what's the problem that should actually be solved? What's the impact you want to achieve? What are general specific objectives? What are outcomes, outputs, impacts? What are the instruments you want to use? And then make sure that you also discuss this with your colleagues in energy policy, mobility policy, and all that, because this is only research, right? And then then it comes back to, actually this is working with people, because you suddenly have to basically build teams that span different DGs, different ministries, the ministry plus the agency, the ministry plus the fund. So I think it's our job as DGs also to then give them the tools how to do that. So I actually went in with agile organizational development methods that actually help them to work together and not end up in this huge, okay, now I have to be systemic, which means I have to suddenly talk to 20 colleagues and I can't get my work done, which is the reality of trying to make people work systemically. So we are on our way now, and I listened to some of my colleagues yesterday presenting their next year's program, and I was really happy to see that how they presented it in terms of the challenges that should be met how, this is another very important task I give to my team usually, align with the European level, because we are very small and we should also always keep funds to kind of co-fund initiatives that come from Europe. And how they kind of said, okay, this mobility challenge and what we have planned there really links to circular. This really links to space. This really links to energy. There we have our European partnerships. There we see developments at the Horizon level. So what I want to say is that this is really hardcore cultural change work in institutions, which is the reality between your very nice line, think about some institutional change. And this is really just one example from Austria, but I think this is exactly the stuff we need to think about. 90% of my work is organizational development and change.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this inspirational example from Austria, silo-breaking policy making. We have a bit of experience with that as well, Mark, in particular with our missions, where we are closely collaborating across the Commission services. Any thoughts on your side? I'm also mindful of the time. We are having such an interesting discussion here that time just flies. Would you like to say some words on this systemic approach before we move on?
Well, listening very carefully to colleagues here, what crossed my mind is that, well, first, certainly, when talking about energy and mobility, I mean, having to think systemically is a no-brainer. It's an absolute must. But then, listening also to Floor's example and how far she pushed it when it comes to mobility and electric vehicles, it also suggested to me that the clearer we are on the system we are aiming for, the easier it gets then. Because there is one element which Floor mentioned and which is not yet, I would say, common wisdom. Certainly in Europe, certainly in the US, and probably also in China, in fact. And it is that if you push the logic to the extreme, based on present car ownership and so on and so forth, and you expand that to the whole world, it doesn't work. And so there is some rethinking to do. And in terms of policy and policy choices, and here we are about very difficult policy choices, obviously, which need to be ultimately collective policy choices, especially in our democracies, carried by a large majority of people, we are sometimes missing such elements which we would see from a systemic point of view as indispensable, but which we cannot really factor in because the policy choice has not yet been made. And then I just want to jump to the suggestion that not everything is as suited to a systemic approach as energy and transport. And we should also keep that in mind, indeed. If you think, for instance, about the health area, a lot has to do with finding new treatments or whatever, which do not require that much of systemic thinking, and so we should not complexify where it is not needed, because Henriette, I think, demonstrated well that it's pretty hard to really apply a systemic approach also from the institutional point of view, indeed.
Very good. I give you 1 minute, Frank, to quickly react, and then we will wrap up.
Well, I think we are in the third industrial revolution, and like the first and the second, that means that multiple systems interact. So it's not only about single systems which are changing, it's now also about the interaction between the systems. So this is the spillovers between them. Now, Mark already said we are electrifying the economy, so we go to cheap renewable electricity, then electric transport, electric heating, but that means the grid. We need to double, if not triple, the grid, which means and that it takes 10 years now to just make a single cable. So that's really a big challenge. We need to invest a lot more. We need to upgrade the grid. But once you have cheap electricity, you can make green hydrogen, then you can make green steel, then you can make green fertilizers. So then agriculture can also become green. We need to do more recycling of the batteries to get the cobalt out. That means circular economy. So my point is, the systemic approach is also between the systems, and I think this used to be the case in past industrial revolutions. They have knock-on effects through the wider economy, and I think that's the phase we're in now. So that makes it even more complicated, but also it's got potential for acceleration, because the cost of renewables will keep coming down, and that will probably pull some of the other sectors along. So I'm also more positive than I was 5 or 10 years ago, that the space will open up. Once we start doing things, there will be knock-on effects that we can't anticipate yet, but which have wider innovation cascades across the economy. And I think that's also part of the multi-system approach in a way.
Beautiful. So thank you very much. I'm afraid that we have come to the end of our very stimulating and inspiring panel discussion. So we need to wrap up, unfortunately. So this is the end of the launch event of the independent expert report that looked into how we can address European research innovation challenges for a systemic transition in the energy and transport sectors. I would like to ask my panelists, before I completely close, what is the key message that you would like our audience to retain from this discussion? And I know it's a difficult question because we've had very rich discussion, but if there's one thing that you think our audience should remember, and this evening, because the weekend is starting, when maybe some of our viewers will have a nice glass of wine and will tell their family members or their friends, we had this really interesting morning launch event in the RTD studio, and what I learned was one sentence. Floor.
The pivotal importance of advancing in Europe on digital technologies.
System change requires the building of ecosystems.
Beautiful.
We need reports like this to make better choices. We have to make choices, and in our world of systemic change, integrated systems, interdependency of systems, and so on, it's very tough to make these choices. Mm-hmm. So we need enlightenment of this kind.
Yeah, I agree. It was a fantastic report. But I would also, my pitch would be that innovation policy needs to be more strategically aligned with industrial policy, and that this requires hard choices about looking at the competitors and where we can actually have a chance, where we can actually compete internationally, and this balance needs to be struck more strategically.
Thank you very much. So from my side, a big thank you again to our amazing panelists. Let's also not forget the two co-authors of the report, Paula Kivima and Wolf Ketter. Also big thank you for this amazing report. A big thank you to you, our viewers, and a big shout out to our studio colleagues here that make everything happen behind the scene. It was again an amazingly flawless event. So now the only thing you need to do is download the report. You will see the QR code, and now at least you have something amazing to do for the weekend. Read these 100, how many?
10.
110 pages. Thank you very much for being with us today, and see you next time.